Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the Blacklist. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, we're dealing with one of Townsend's go-to people, and that is Dr. Perillos, who is kind of where her namesake kind of comes from was it the Brazen Bull? It's basically an old school torture device, and that's kind of her go-to. She tortures people for Townsend to get information out of them. Obviously, they ended up talking to one of her victims in the episode because he's the only victim that's ever survived her torture, and we saw like he was mutilated beyond. Because obviously, it's like, oh, what did he go through? No one knows. It's like you'll know once you see it, and like his bottom jaw is gone, and it's just like, and I'm assuming because of the way his skin is, like either like she just like whatever she did, it's like, of course you're never going to want to talk about her because like you don't want to take the chance she'll come back. You managed to survive, and you don't want her to come back and find you, you know? But basically, that's how Townsend handles a lot of business stuff. Like, essentially, she's the go-to of like, okay, I want all this information about your business, and after I'm done with it, I'm going to kill you. Because obviously, we saw the whole thing at the beginning. Because at first, it's like, once again, when you hear like her, you're immediately thinking like, oh, whoever this dude that's getting kidnapped at the beginning, like this whole fake medics thing, you're thinking like, oh, this must be something Elizabeth set in motion because she's crossed a lot of lines recently. So it's not too surprising, like to think like, oh, maybe she's potentially behind this with her new deals with Townsend, but it's Townsend's go-to person setting that whole thing in motion. But he's like, yeah, because at first she was in Germany, but it's like, yeah, I need you in the U.S. to take care of some things. So obviously Reddington talks to one of the dudes that launders Townsend's money to get information from him, and it's like, okay, so we're going to go meet up with Rudiger, and they're talking because obviously there's a conversation about Liz, which now Cooper's been filled in on, like, oh yeah, she's also working with Townsend, which even suggesting like him putting out a arrest warrant for Liz was kind of the wrong move, because I think for him it's just like, I think in his mind it's like, by vilifying her, villainizing her like that, all you're going to do is push her further down that path because she's going to feel like she has nowhere to return to. I think that might be what Reddington was getting into. We don't know. He didn't really say, but obviously it's like, no, it's not a mistake. It's tragic that we're even at this point we have to do this, but we kind of have no choice. But obviously even the rest of the team, it's like, wait, there's no way, like Liz would be, once again, she's crossed a lot of lines recently, but it's like, would she really work with someone like Perillos, knowing what she's done, the way she tortures people and all the terrible stuff she's involved in? Like, Liz wouldn't, that's what they're asking themselves more and more recently. Like, no, there's no way, like, Liz would never work with Townsend. It's like, well, we won't know the truth until we find out. And obviously, we do find out that, obviously, Liz played her own role in all of this, because at one point, obviously, they're meeting up with Rudiger, Reddington and Dembe are, and then all of a sudden, like, Dembe's looking at a car nearby. We didn't get to see who really was in it, but I was like, I'm thinking it was Liz wanting to see things kind of go down herself. Not unless that was someone else, but I think that was supposed to be Liz nearby, and Dembe was almost like, okay, something's not right here. People roll up and attack, and luckily he was able to get Reddington out of there. But in the process, Dembe ended up getting captured. Not the first time Dembe's gotten held hostage and is going to be tortured for information. Obviously, it happened fairly recently with the whole Katerina situation. So, so it's still a fresh enough wound. I mean, well, that was more so like being, his Amon was being threatened. It's like, oh, I'm going to kill your Amon if you don't basically betray Reddington. So, obviously for Reddington, it's like he's desperate. Like, obviously, guys, give me whatever information you can. We need to find Dembe, because if we don't, the doctor, she's going to do her thing. And it's not a matter of, when, like, if what information Dembe will give her. It's more about how long he will survive or something like that. So Dembe is fighting against her torture, whatever she, obviously you have Townsend asking about the archive, and Dembe's not giving him anything. And obviously Perillos, like, we know, like, her whole thing, it was interesting. Like, it's almost like she gets off on pain. And she kind of brought up a lot of interesting things where it's like, yeah, like the reason why black people don't get a lot of, like, the medication they need, because she ends up talking about her mom and her situation. It's like, oh yeah, my mom, when I was 12 years old, my mom went in for something else, but they misdiagnosed her and just basically sent her home with, ibuprofen or something like that. Like nothing to heal the infection that she actually had, because to them they felt like black people, they have a higher tolerance for pain or whatever. So, and I thought it was interesting because it seemed like she was trying to form this bond of common ground, but maybe that's kind of part of her torture. But also, I think her trying to make Dembe kind of understand more so than anything. It's like, oh, you think Reddington understands your pain, but he doesn't. He doesn't really see your pain, even though you think he does. Do you really think he does? Like, so she was trying to make a point while once again also kind of having her own sadistic nature of kind of enjoying the pain. Granted, we kind of get a little bit more into that, but Reddington is willing to give himself over. Like, he goes through different channels because he goes to the launderer and it's like, you sold us out, you heard us talk about Rudiger, so you're the one that betrayed us. It's like, all right, and basically ends up shooting him in the leg, and it's like, I'll bring you a cane so you'll always remember me. So it's like, basically he set it up so that it's like, all right, Townsend, let's talk. They talk, and it's like, I will give you what you want. I will trade you me for Dembe, and Townsend's down for that. Luckily, Dembe managed to escape on his own, but it was already too late. Reddington had already gotten drugged and was ready to turn himself in by the time Dembe called. So now it turns into a situation. He's working with the FBI to try and working on their side of things as well as the FBI side of things to try and find Reddington. And when the time came out, it's once again just the interesting thing about who Reddington is, under the very tense situation, still being able to kind of be snarky and whatnot. I even love it. She's like, "Oh, do you know what this is?" And he's like, "If I say yes, can we skip the demonstration?" And even later on, being like, "Well, be careful, I'm ticklish." And then she pokes his foot with the drug she's inflicting him with, and he's like, "Oh, see, told you." But it was interesting because obviously for her, she was kind of going in, like I said, explaining her fascination with pain. It is, like I said, she's a little sadistic with it, but for her, it's like she's trying to find a cure, not necessarily medicine, but more so a solution to humans' pains, to basically humanity. So she because that's why she found Dembe so interesting too, his tolerance for pain and stuff like that. But also, it's like her wanting to understand pain on such a different level, to kind of see it, to understand it, to be able to inflict it, but also to know how to essentially cure it. Because for her, she wants to basically rewrite human DNA so they can't feel pain. Because obviously, it's like, that's what's so interesting, because it seems like pain is so intoxicating to her, but it's also because of her own pain and her own mom. Because her mom's circumstances, the infection ended up spreading, and she became bedridden for the rest of her life. So it's like, when it's that kind of pain, she wants to ease the world's pain, but it's kind of a little into it as well. That's what I'm like, I guess that's the human condition of just being kind of an enigma and a conundrum all at once, But what was interesting, though, is that Reddington thinks she has a terrible idea, because for him it's like, without pain, you can have no pleasure, and without the lows, how can you ever measure the highs? So it's, once again, it's kind of like that dual side of the coin of kind of love and grief, and just kind of hurt and pain, hurt and love too. You kind of can't have one without the other. So the pain makes you appreciate the love and the good. So you need the good, the bad, the hurt, the pain. They kind of balance itself out. You just can't have one without the other. So I just thought that was an interesting. Obviously, even Townsend was like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a bit of a romantic," and Reddington's like, "Oh yeah, I am." Obviously, it's there's certain aspects that are so core, deep in his core. For example, wanting to put a bullet in your head. So that was interesting. But obviously, more so than anything, I thought was really interesting was the talk of him being even in this moment, it's not as satisfying. There's a bit of dissatisfaction because you've wanted this, you anticipated it, and obviously for Townsend, it's it exceeds expectations. No, I wasn't talking to you. I'm talking to my real assassin, Elizabeth. He's like, I get it, and it's self-serving. I do want you to tell the doctor to give me the medication, the antidote to this paralytic. But more so than anything, it's because I don't want you to go down this route. I've never wanted you to go down that route. As someone who's on the other side of that river, I don't want you to go down this route, because what it will do to you, because you can never go back. Because Liz has at this point in time, she's killed people out of self-defense. She's never killed anyone just cold-blooded murder-wise. Reddington has. And once you go down that path, it becomes some people would tell you it becomes easier and easier, but also it's just you've already kind of tarnished your soul and there's no going back. But it's like, Liz, you're a good person at heart. Like, you cross the line sometimes, but it's like, you haven't fully crossed the line. It's not to the point you can't come back yet. Not, well, because the roundabout way is, let's not forget, it was her Cyranoid that ended up killing Mary, so there's still that buffer window if she didn't actually do it herself. Granted, she kind of gave the Cyranoid the go-ahead, but still. And when the time came, Liz still didn't really call it in to, like, stop, because it's like, this is what she wanted. Once again, she was willing to let her Cyranoid die last episode. Once again, whether she knew that Reddington was bluffing, I don't think she did, because she made sure to pack up anything just in case, I guess, her Cyranoid talked. But also, it's just like, she also made sure to turn off the recording so, like, she wouldn't have to see it. So there was a part of her that figured Reddington would do it, because there's been plenty of people he's pulled the trigger on, or, you know, been both directly and indirectly responsible for their deaths. So obviously, I don't know. I'm curious at the end of it all, you know, has what Reddington said done anything to Liz? Has it quelled that anger, that need for revenge inside of her? I have no idea. Reddington's still saying, like, I didn't kill your family. Katarina did, and I killed her. You know? So, once again, I always feel like, and this has just been me personally, I feel like Reddington has very much, well, I think, which I guess this is an interesting comparison. I was about to compare him to Lucifer from the TV show Lucifer. Lucifer never lies. That's always his thing. So I think Reddington's the same way. There's always a thing of, he never tells you everything, so it's a lie of omission, sure. But I think for him, he won't lie to you. Granted, he just won't tell you the truth. He'll just be like, okay, if that's what you believe, we'll run with that narrative, but I won't lie to you, but I won't correct you either, you know? So that's my thing of, like, I don't think Reddington has ever lied. I mean, someone could probably be like, oh, what about this, or that? Like, I'm sure there's probably examples someone could be like, but there's also moments where, like I said, I feel like he's never outright lied to her. Like I said, he's admitted the truth and chose not to tell her the 100% the facts, but I don't think he's ever lied to her. And I don't think he lies in general, even with this whole Townsend thing. I think it's him being like, no, I'm a criminal and I'm honest, but that's also a thing too. Is like, I'm a criminal. You should never believe a criminal. So maybe that's also an element to this too. But I just feel like he's always been, yes, like I said, he's held back the truth. He's admitted the truth, but I don't think he's ever outright lied about anything. But, you know, that's a whole other can of worms within itself. What I also thought was a really interesting situation was the conversation between Harold and Dembe when it was like, all right, like, Dembe doesn't like to sit around doing nothing. So I was like, all right, I'll go through these files, you go through that one. He goes through it, and it's like, you have Harold being like, and don't take any offense from this, but you would actually make a good cop. And he was like, Dembe was kind of like, no, you know what I do. It's like, yeah, but I know who you are. It's like, he's like, a black Muslim. It's like, yeah, and there are a few cops who are like that. So it's like, you know, but for, you know, Dembe's like, you know what I do, and he was like, yes. And eventually, Reddington will eventually cross that line, and he kind of brings it up to him later on of like, what are you going to do when he does? Obviously, Dembe ends up finding out Rudiger is the one that sold them out, so it sadly wasn't. I mean, I'm sure dude who launders money probably could have played a role in it, but Rudiger was behind it, and that's the whole hand situation. He got tortured, and he ended up betraying them. And he was even telling Dembe, it's like, he's going and he's not coming back. Granted, it all works out because luckily Dembe was able to get there in time. But luckily, Dembe got there in time to get the doctor to give him the antidote. And obviously, it's like, tell me everything you did to him. And they do it to her to get any information, which at the end of the day, they weren't able to get too much information about Townsend's whole situation. So, I was actually surprised, like, when Wrestler showed up, I was almost halfway expected to be, oh, she's dead, or from maybe, like, a bullet in her head, because, you know, Reddington being like, oh, my greatest, all the pleasure I'm going to get from killing you, or whatever, when he was talking about the good doctor. So I'm wondering, like, maybe... But for her to be fine at the end of the day, I was like, oh, that's interesting. So it's like, oh, you're going to tell us everything you told Dembe and Reddington about Townsend. But obviously, like I said, it's not much. That they only contact through a burner phone. It's like, well, do you believe her? I don't know. But at the end of the day, Reddington asked the interesting question where he was like, do you think I see your pain? Do you? And then Dembe says, no, not always. And I think that's interesting, and I think it hurts Reddington a little bit, but I think it's also the thing of, yeah, you're right, I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoe, because it's like not just the pain on the outside, but the pain on the inside. Because Denbei's had to do a lot of stuff in support of Reddington. He's voiced his opinion, but he's still done a lot of stuff, that kind of probably crushes his soul a little bit, and just things that he doesn't 100% agree with. So it's like, you don't always see my pain. You can see it sometimes, but it's also that thing of like, a lot of times you can be very sympathetic to a person's situation, but you can never be empathetic, because you never, unless you've 100% walked a mile in their shoes, you will never know 100% how a person is feeling and what they're going through and what, they're dealing with. And it's like, because that was also the point that, once again, that she would, Perillos was trying to make, was like, oh, like, you came to save him, but he came here to save himself. It's like, yes, but I'm the one that's here right now, and he's the one struggling to breathe. So, do you think Townsend would do the same thing for you? Would anyone? But that still doesn't take away the thing that for Denbei, it's like, you don't always see my pain, like, because he also puts up a strong front of like, because it's like, I think for him, it's also a thing of like, you think you know my heart, but you don't. You barely scratch the surface. You don't know what's at my deepest recesses. Like, we live different lives. We have different experiences. You've been through some pain. I've been through. So it makes you wonder when he was telling the doctor, like, he knows my pain, because I guess of all that Reddington's been through. But it's also like, let's not forget the pain that Denbei's in because of like having to be his secret keeper and what that means, being his closest friend and confidant, and what burdens that comes with. So, but at the end of the day, you had Harold say once again, eventually when he crosses that line, because he eventually will, you have to decide for yourself, Denbei, what are you going to do? So that's obviously, I think that's going to be a bigger thing that comes up, because I guess it's like, yeah, he's done criminal stuff here and there, but it will be a point where he crosses a line that no one can forgive. So I think that's kind of what he's talking about. It's going to be a point where Denbei's no longer going to be able to accept anything that Reddington does. Like, Reddington will do one thing that would just be too much and a line too far. Maybe not. It's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front. But what we saw at the end was Townsend, like, I thought they were kind of making him work out a little bit, because it's like, we need it. Once again, we don't know what his condition is, because like, I'm sorry to wake you, sir, but I'm guessing, like I brought up before, like, either like he has like a medical condition, kind of like that disease that once you go, you will lose the ability to sleep. You basically have like insomnia until you die, because your body just gives out from pure exhaustion. It just kind of, I was wondering that, or maybe there's some other medical thing going on there, but I thought that had something to do with it. And then the guy's like, okay, stop, Neville, stop. And then it turns out, Rudiger was in the bad, because it's like, yeah, they went to Rudiger's place to find him, couldn't find him. It's like, I zip tied him, and it's like, Townsend got him, and it's like, okay, the only reason why you're alive right now is because Keen begged for your life, so do not fail me again. So he was in the punching bag. It's like, and Rudiger got messed up. It's like, whoa. So kind of showing you what kind of person Neville is. It's like, no, I'm not just going to have my people beat you up. I'm going to beat you up myself. That I think that speaks volumes on just who he is. That, it's like, Townsend's not afraid to get his hands dirty when the time comes. Shows you what kind of person that he is, that when the time comes, I think he wants to be able to handle a lot of stuff himself. But that was an interesting development. And also just one less ally on Reddington's side. But also, I guess Liz kind of felt like, she wanted Reddington dead. She didn't want anyone else who's in his circle to kind of get rough into the deal, especially considering he got tortured, and now, like, he's got both bridges burnt, because Townsend's like, you failed me. Plus, Reddington, when he finds out, is going to kill Rudiger. But it's like, rather than that, like, save him, he can be on our side, because if I leave him out in the wild, Reddington will find him and kill him. So that kind of sucks, because Rudiger, you got tortured and everything, but it's also like, hey, this is a lot of dividing lines, dude, because obviously we saw early in the season, like, Liz trying to gather up allies against him, and obviously a lot of people, out of love, respect, or fear, or a combination of all three, don't turn against Reddington. Obviously, we were seeing slowly but surely that is kind of being chipped away. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where things go on that front going forward into the next episode. But to the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.